Hi everyone, welcome to ClubSciWri's interview session today. Today we have with us a very special guest, Amy Aines. So a little bit about Amy. Amy Aines has more than 40 years of experience improving leadership effectiveness and business performance through effective communication. She is both a versatile communicator and an experienced advisor. Essentially, she teaches scientists and technologists how to explain their ideas more clearly so they can make a bigger impact with their work. The skills she teaches are important for postdocs who need to learn to talk about their research and their experiences in job interviews as well. A bit about her background. Amy studied communication and media at Connecticut College and UC Santa Barbara. She then went on to work at various communication roles, from technical writer to company spokesperson to brand builder, PR, and marketing communications, promoting all kinds of technical products in companies like Coscom, Pacific Telesis Group, AirTouch, Genentech, to name a few. She also serves as advisory board member for Carbon 180 and Quest, a nonprofit working to build a new science center in her community of Livermore. In 1999, Amy created Damianix Communications, a consulting firm dedicated to help scientists build support for their work and company leaders effectively tell their company story, deliver results, and navigate change. In November of 2017, she joined Waterhouse Brands, a consultancy creating high-impact brands for mission-driven healthcare companies as Chief Culture Strategist. She, along with Dr. Roger Aines, authored Championing Science, Communicating Your Ideas to Decision Makers, a popular book among psychomers today. This book is a comprehensive guide that shows scientists how to persuasively communicate complex scientific ideas to decision makers in government, industry, and education sectors. Now, she is developing online courses to increase the reach and accelerate the learning curve for new graduates and early career professionals in STEM fields. You can check out her website, Talking STEM, and join the associated Facebook group of the same name to know more about her and her work. Hi, Amy. Welcome. ClubSciWri is delighted to host you as a special guest today.
Amrita, it's so nice to get a chance to spend some time with you. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll get started. So I have a bunch of questions for you today, which I think will be very interesting for our viewers.
Great.
So I'll get started with, how has your work overall and your focus changed since your book, Championing Science, was published?
Well, you can see it on my calendar. I am spending a lot more time lecturing and running workshops and teaching and coaching ever since the book came out. People are finding us. We started doing a full day workshop at UCLA last year, shortly after the book came out. And we've had many invitations doing keynotes, speaking at postdoc association meetings. We were invited down to Stanford last year for their Bay Area postdoc meeting to do a workshop. And later this week, we're talking to some students out of the University of Kansas who have a grant that they got from Research America to do a virtual book club. So that's a first for us. And it's so gratifying, and it's really exciting because one of my passions is helping people be successful, and communication skills are so key because we talk all the time. And a lot of times we do it without really thinking about it.
Okay. So you mentioned that you recently gave a keynote at the Postdoc Association meeting at Stanford. So what were some of the important themes that you discussed there?
Well, we got invited back after our workshop last year to keynote the Stanford postdoc event this year. And because it was on Zoom, we tried to take a little bit of a different approach. And our focus was on some of the pitfalls, the things that we see happen often. And Roger and I like to do these things together. It's a lot of fun because we wrote the book together, and we both bring perspective, his as a scientist and mine as a communicator. So we talked about four things. We talked about how scientists typically just use way too many words and need to understand how important it is to be succinct. We also cautioned people about trying to convince people by using more facts and data, because oftentimes that backfires. And we talked about the fact that in science there's uncertainty. So how do you talk about that? How do you maintain your credibility and your integrity, but at the same time help people understand what's possible based on the science as you know it? And the last thing we talked about was really relationship rooted, because if you're an expert in your field, you're going to get to know people that you'll probably know your entire career. So relationships are really important. We talked a little bit about making sure that you build friendships along the way, because that's part of what carries you to get further with your work.
So in your opinion, what is the best way for postdocs to give really engaging talks? Especially when, let's say, the audience has like a mixture of people who come from both a technical and a non-technical background. So in that kind of a scenario, what is your advice?
Well, given that we're doing everything over Zoom right now, the first thing I'd say is your voice is so important. And I've got a video in my Facebook group that talks about how you use your voice to be more engaging. And in environments like this, it's one of the things that we have. We also have our gestures, but a lot of what people are doing is hearing my voice. And the other thing about making talks engaging is to think about who's in the room listening to you, to really understand what are they going to care about, and how do you talk about your science that in a way that shows your passion for it, but also helps them understand why it matters, because that is often the starting point for engagement. And then it has a lot to do with the way you package the information and what you share. And when they're mixed audiences, which happens all the time, right? You'll have some experts, so you don't want to appear as though you're a lightweight. You want to make sure that you come across as someone who knows your stuff. But at the same time, you don't want to lose people in the room, because people will tune out if you talk over their heads. And there's a way to do both.
Okay. So the next question is purely anecdotal. So tell us about a time when you've helped scientists, say, prepare or address a very important situation that they came across.
Well, I've been doing this for a long time, so I'll pick something recent. Had the opportunity to work with a woman who was doing a job interview, and she was preparing her seminar for that interview. So we spent time thinking about the job, what it was that she was trying to convey to them about her ability to be the right person for the job. And it was less about talking about her science. It was more about narrating her work in a way that showcased the things that made her right for the job. So we spent a lot of time simplifying her slides, really getting clear about what message is she making, how is she sending that message, and how is she proving that message by the points that she describes along the way. And she's still waiting to hear. This is really recent. She's still waiting to hear, but she had 24 interviews within that company. So clearly they see her as a serious contender. So I'm hoping that she gets good news.
Okay. So since we've been talking about how to like talk about your research during job interviews, do you have any like rule of thumbs or something like A, B, C, D things you need to address, and that will be like the best way to talk about your research during a job interview?
Absolutely. First and foremost, you want to be memorable. You want to find a way to stand out. And people remember stories. So when you think about the interview, you want to think about, how am I going to tell my story? What is it about my experience, the things I've learned, the things I've done that makes me really interesting, and at the same time demonstrates why I'm the right person for the job? So that's your frame of reference as you start to think about it. And then you want to think carefully about the words that you use. And when you're bringing your research into the conversation, get people excited about what you've learned from your research. The why it matters part is so important to engaging anybody listening to you. But there's a difference between saying, I study, and diving into the details of what you study, and saying, I study this because we're trying to understand how it can change medical science. And it gets even better if you say, I spent the last 6 years studying this because it will benefit medical science. So now you've told me you've been at this for a while. You're not an entry-level scientist, right? So it's that kind of thinking. And I know these may sound like small differences, But if the first thing I hear, if I'm interviewing you and the first thing I hear is, I spent 6 years, I know you're dedicated, I know you are experienced, and you could even say I spent 6 years supervising a research team that was working on, and that begins to tell me even more. And this was some of the guidance that I gave to the woman I was just talking about, is, figure out how to tell the story. How many people were in your research group? What sorts of labs did you run? It's less about your research. It's more about why you're right for the job. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, in line with that, so what made you and your husband, Roger, decide to write your book, The Championing Science? And along with what was the motivation behind the book, what are the various aspects that you address in this book? I'm here to get a copy myself, but yeah, just like to hear it from the author.
I'd be happy to send you one. We can autograph one for you.
Of course, thank you.
Both of us, so Roger and I met 9 years ago, and one of the things that we had both observed in our professional lives was how really smart people who had amazing ideas often struggled to convey them clearly. And in his world, he works for Lawrence Livermore National Lab. So in the lab, there's competition for funding, and scientists are competing for funding all the time. And that was one of the places he really saw it, is that people who could explain their ideas well got more support for their work. And I had seen it throughout my entire career because I've always worked in technical companies. So, the business leaders I've worked with have largely been scientists and technologists. And I saw the difference that it made when they understood communication. And what's interesting is that, unless you've studied communication, you don't necessarily think about it as such a strategic set of steps. And that's why I've always been a coach, helping people find the right words, because there's a way to say things that makes a real difference. So both of us, seeing that, decided, actually, he was the one who really pushed it. I said, maybe we can just do a paper. And he said, no, I really think this is a book. And the more we sat down to outline it, we went, this really is a book. And it's been so gratifying for us, because we thought we'd self-publish and maybe get some copies around to people he knew, the scientists he knew, the people I worked with. And to have University of California Press choose to publish it has been really gratifying. So you also asked, what is the book about, right? And it's
right, yeah.
It's written to help scientists talk to decision makers. And we focus there really specifically because if you look around, there are many books about talking to the public. And I think sometimes the broad category of SciComm is a lot about public engagement. And if that's what you're doing as a SciCommer, our book will help you because the principles still apply. But we really wanted to focus on decision makers. And in Roger's world, he works with a lot of government sponsors. So that's a particular category that we speak to. And we cover a lot of very fundamental things about communication. I've had some friends read the book who've said, I'm never going to do anything with science, but this has really made a difference for me with my nonprofit work. So as I said, we communicate all the time, and learning how to think about it differently can make a big difference.
Okay. So what was the whole experience like, the whole experience of publishing this book, and why did you focus on communicating to decision makers specifically?
Well, I think that the opportunity to advance your work requires you to convey and compel decision makers to act. And to make that happen, your ideas need to be heard and understood. And when we were researching the book, we spent some time in DC, and we were talking to a lot of folks who are involved as staffers. And they were saying, we've got representatives from Congress who want to hear what scientists think. But a lot of times after they have those meetings, they come out saying, well, that was a waste of time. And what happens is the scientist is just talking way over their heads, doesn't really understand why the science matters to them. And so for us, the opportunity, if you look at our world today, to help more scientists influence policy was really important to us. And also, you know, we need to solve a lot of big problems. And if you have really great ideas, but you can't convey them well, you're not going to get traction. So that was the big driver for us in terms of our approach. It took us a while. We started in 2013. We built our Championing Science website very early on, and we've got a lot of material, some really good resources. There's a library, there's some video clips. So I highly recommend people spend some time taking a look there. And it took us 6 years to finish the book because we both had really full careers and other things going on in between then. We ended up getting married and had a lot of travel and adventure that interrupted our work. But as we like to say, we really sat many weekends and many nights nerding out over creating this book because we both saw a need for it. The curriculum doesn't exist in most universities. So we're really trying to help fill that gap.
Okay, so you collaborated with your husband to get this book out. So that's a different kind of team dynamic in itself. So how was that experience overall, and what did you learn from that?
Well, as I mentioned, we weren't married when we started working on the book. And if Roger were here, he would tell you that he was pretty sure I'd say yes when he asked me to marry him, but he wasn't so sure what I'd say about the book. And it ended up just being really enjoyable for us. We both encouraged each other and were there to read each other's work and give each other feedback. So it was really nice having a partner, you know, and in some ways it's like doing a scientific paper, right? Each of us was sort of lead author on the places where we had the expertise. And if you read the book, you'll very definitely hear the difference between our voices. I bet you can guess who speaks in longer sentences. It's my scientist. And every now and then I'd have to say, you know, we need to break this up a little bit. It's this dense a paragraph. So it was great because we could really pull on each other's strengths. And one of my most memorable moments was when we found out that the committee, there's a review committee through University of California Press that has to say yes to every book. And we were traveling together. We were on the Isle of Skye, and we were with Roger's oldest son, who's an archaeologist. And we just got enough cell signal. We were looking at an old ruin of a church, and we were in a graveyard, and we were standing there, and suddenly we had cell service. And I thought, oh, I'm going to check messages. And we heard from our editor that our book was being published. So it was one of those things where doing it together just had its magic moments. And that was one of them.
Okay, that's really nice to hear. Then with respect to your career on the whole, so what aspects of work has given you the most satisfaction in the past, now, and probably even in the future?
You know, it's interesting. I've been thinking a lot about that. And because I've really shifted, I still do some consulting work, and I'm involved right now in a culture project, and I love that work. And at the same time, after writing the book, I had this sort of realization that at this stage of my career, I really want to help more people be successful. And that's part of what I love. I've always been a cheerleader and a communications coach. And the opportunity to help young scientists who are early in their careers land a job and be effective when they get into the workplace, there's a lot to know. And that's the material that I'm putting together as I develop the courses that I'm creating online. Because I feel like if people can learn this early in their career, it can make a big difference for their effectiveness. So for me, it's about helping more people be successful.
Okay. Yeah, that has been a lot of useful information so far. So any concluding comments and messages for our viewers today?
Well, I think I would just ask, reach out to me. I'd like to know what you struggle with from a communications perspective. You can connect at amy@championingscience.com. That's my easiest email to find. And I'd like to know what kinds of materials would be most helpful. And I'm going to start putting more information up in this Talking STEM Facebook group. That's just getting started. But my goal is to be a resource. And I'm looking forward to connecting with the folks in your community so I can make that happen.
Okay, so Thank you so much for all that, Amy. So now on behalf of ClubSciWri and all our viewers, I would like to thank you once again. And hopefully our viewers got information and a lot of inspiration from watching this interview. Thank you all, and see you soon.
Thank you. This has just been my pleasure. I love to talk about my passion for communicating. So I thank you for the opportunity.